The Committee on Homeland Security will come to order. We'd like to welcome our congressperson from Delaware, and I'd like to ask unanimous consent that Representative Castle be allowed to sit and participate in the hearing before the committee today. So ordered. The committee is meeting today to do oversight on the Department of Homeland Security's rollout of the Transportation Worker Identification Credential. I'd like to also indicate that the ranking member indicated he's en route and that we could begin, and he should come before I finish my remarks. Good morning, and thank you for being here today for the oversight hearing of the Transportation Worker Identification Credential, commonly referred to as TWIC. This hearing dovetails nicely with the hearing that was held by Ms. Sanchez's subcommittee yesterday. TWIC was mandated in law 5 years ago. It was supposed to provide an extra layer of security at our nation's ports and other critical transportation hubs. However, it seems that even before this program gets off the ground, it may have some fatal flaws that undermine its ultimate effectiveness. I look forward to the hearing testimony on how the rollout has been going in Wilmington over the past 2 weeks. It should be very instructive for what other ports should expect. Already, we're hearing that organized crime is working to develop a fake TWIC card to operate in our ports. It's time to say enough is enough. It's time for the Department of Homeland Security to step up. The department needs to be straight with us and give us specifics on when TWIC will be rolled out at all our nation's ports. We also need to know how many people will need a TWIC card and what resources are necessary to process them. If the estimates that I'm hearing are correct, you have a real problem on your hand with the estimates. In the past, the department has projected that 750,000 workers would need cards in the entire nation. The Port of Houston alone expects 350,000 applicants, unless we're wrong somehow, and that's not one of the larger ports, as you know. We also need to know how many transportation workers are going to be disqualified from attaining a TWIC. We understand that some estimates go as high as 40% of all truck drivers could be disqualified. The department's inability to correctly forecast these numbers undermines this committee's confidence in you getting the program right. Ports could become and should be a vital part of our commerce in this country, and if not done right, we could come to a virtual standstill. This would and have a real and direct impact on commerce. Similarly, I'm concerned about the department's waiver and appeal process. DHS is going to depend on the FBI records to check names. FBI records, according to the Justice Department, are flawed and incomplete. In fact, about half of all records do not even have information on final dispositions. Finally, I'm concerned about the possibility that the TWIC credential is not going to be the one and only card that our nation's transportation workers will have to obtain. The department has decided not to preempt states' access cards, therein creating yet another layer of bureaucracy and additional cost to our workers. The department is already charging $132.50 for the TWIC. How much more should we expect folk to pay? We also see Florida, for instance, has already created its own access card. Our nation's transportation workers do not deserve more bureaucracy and confusion. We owe them security, we owe them accountability, and most importantly, we owe them freedom from fear. Our workers deserve no less. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, the gentleman from New York, Mr. King, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I appreciate the hearing being held, and I thank you for holding it, scheduling it. I would also want to welcome Mr. Castle from Delaware. Obviously, the port in Delaware is the first up, and it's very thoughtful of him to be here to give us the benefit of his insights, and thank him for his service. Obviously, the TWIC program is vital. We've been waiting for it for years. It's a priority of the Congress that it be done. It's also a priority that it be done the right way. It would serve no purpose to rush it through and create more problems. At the same time, DHS has to make sure that this is implemented, that while the scheduled dates are not being met, the fact is that every effort should be made to move it along as quickly as possible. Chairman recited a list of things that could go wrong and potential problems. And that's true. Nobody said this would be easy. And I think it's important for us to listen to the testimony today to see what has been done, what is planned to be done, what's happening with the pilot programs, when full implementation is going to be expected, what's going to happen as far as the card reader pilot, what's going to happen as far as the employees, as far as their backgrounds, how that will impact, how many it's going to affect, whether or not DHS is on target or close to being on target as far as the number of cards that will have to be issued. All of these are significant issues. I think it's important, though, for us to realize that it serves no real purpose just reciting what's wrong or what could be wrong. Let's also see what can be done to address the deficiencies that are there, to make sure that when the program is fully up and running and it's running at maximum effectiveness, and that we not just, again, try to carp on what could be possibly done better at some time in the future. Let's make a cooperative effort to work together. Where the department needs help, let's give it to them. Where we think the department is deficient, let's make it known to them and deal with them in a very honest and straightforward way, as I know they will deal with us in their testimony today. I especially want to welcome Bethann Rooney from Port of New York and New Jersey, who has been coming to these hearings for a number of years now. I don't know how she survives either the job or the hearings, but she does it, and I want to thank her for her constant work and dedication, and all the witnesses, especially Kip Hawley, who I believe does an outstanding job, and against terrible odds and under dire circumstances. And with that, I yield back to the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. Other members of the committee are reminded that under committee rules, opening statements may be submitted for the record. I welcome the first panel of witnesses to this hearing. Our first witness is the Honorable Kip Hawley, Administrator of the Transportation Security Administration. Our second witness is Rear Admiral Brian Salerno, Director, Inspection and Compliance, U.S. Coast Guard. Welcome. Our third witness is Ms. Cathy Berrick, who's a senior executive for the Government Accountability Office's Homeland Security and Justice team. We're happy to have you. Without objections, the witness's full statement will be inserted in the record. I now ask each witness to summarize his statement for 5 minutes, beginning with Administrator Hawley. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member King, and members of the subcommittee. I've submitted the testimony for the record, and in the spirit of plain talking, which is honored in this committee, I'd like to just address the issues. I took 6 issues from the opening statement and from both Mr. Thompson and Mr. King that I think are the primary issues that we need to address, and I'll just quickly hit them. On the issue of the number of people who will need TWIC cards, the business model that is a pay-as-you-go system allows for that to be scalable up to whatever number that is. So whether it's 1 million, 1.2 million, 1.5 million is not a constraint on the viability of the program, because the contract is written that our provider gets paid by the card, so there will be resources to flex to whatever that number is. So the fact that we can't identify an exact number of people who will want a card and who will get one, even though it may not be specifically required of them, is not a constraint on the program. On the issue of the disqualifications, the data point that we have is the hazmat endorsement on the commercial driver's license. And it has very similar requirements as the TWIC card, and that has proven not to be a major problem. Our interest is in finding terrorists and keeping them out of our ports, not denying a card to somebody who had an issue earlier in their career. So we found essentially that of the 730,000 people that have been vetted, less than 100 who have been willing to work with us to resolve the issues have had an issue, which is about 1 in 10,000. So our sense is we are not going to have the problem that's projected. We are going to make sure that this program does not become a barrier for good people who are working to be disqualified. Our interest is to get as many people as quickly on board. On the issue of the card readers, the Safe Port Act requires us to do a pilot and then within 2 years issue the final rule on what the card reader requirements are. So in terms of us not having card readers out there when we're issuing TWIC cards, that is directly responsive to the law that was just passed by the Congress. And I think that the enforcement by the Coast Guard is in fact a good security measure that we can elaborate as we go forward. As to the when, we announced for the 147 ports, we announced the quarterly roll for when that should be expected. I think the key point is the one that Mr. King made about that we do it right, that this is the most advanced biometric system that is flexible with all employers, all ports. And if we roll it out too quickly and therefore, as Mr. Thompson said, tie up commerce in these ports, that would defeat the purpose. So our goal is to roll it out as expeditiously as possible, but with a caveat that we're going to make sure it observes all the privacy requirements, the proper due process, the security requirements. We're going to make sure it's a success as we go. As to the issue of the organized crime thing, I think that's a very good signal that they ought to be worried that the TWIC card is coming because they are not able to counterfeit it. When the Coast Guard shows up with their handheld biometric readers, they will be caught. I think they should be worried about it. And the program has gone through an extensive period of preparation and vetting, and we've had a lot of criticism that frankly has helped the program, both from the Inspector General's office, the Congress, and the GAO, that has highlighted the issues with TWIC, and we have addressed those issues, and now the program is in fact up and running, and I do not see a barrier why this program should not continue to be a success, and I look forward to discussing those issues with the committee. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I now recognize Rear Admiral Salerno to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member King, and distinguished members of the committee. And thank you for this opportunity to speak with you this morning on the current status and the way forward for the TWIC program. Since enrollment started in Wilmington, Delaware on October 16th, we have been monitoring all aspects of the process in order to identify any areas that need refinement as we move forward with enrollment in larger and higher consequence ports around the country. The Coast Guard is committed to working in partnership with TSA and with our industry stakeholders to get this right. It's in this spirit that we have already addressed many of the concerns expressed by our stakeholders about TWIC implementation. For example, based on stakeholder input, we, and I mean TSA and the Coast Guard collectively, have increased the number of TWIC enrollment locations from 130 to 147. We've enhanced mobile enrollment capabilities. We've developed detailed guidance documents to assist owners, operators, and TWIC applicants. We've instituted new special hire provisions. We've proposed regulations to streamline merchant mariner applications and reduce the number of credentials they are required to carry. And we've developed and published a state-of-the-art contactless reader specification, which lays the foundation for readers that will maximize personnel throughput and meet the harsh environmental conditions common to maritime operations. This latter point also signals our way forward. Even as we're working to implement the enrollment plan, we have concurrently begun work on a rulemaking that will address card readers, which will be used to verify a TWIC holder's identity. We have sought the collaboration of our stakeholders in this effort and have received recommendations on specific potential reader provisions from the National Maritime Security Advisory Committee, the Merchant Marine Personnel Advisory Committee, and the Towing Safety Advisory Committee. In the meantime, it's important to note that the implementation of TWIC, even in the absence of reader requirements, will have an immediate positive security benefit. For the first time, we will have a universally recognized tamper-resistant credential backed by a robust threat assessment that will be checked before individuals are granted unescorted access to facilities and vessels. The Coast Guard also intends to procure handheld readers for use during routine and unscheduled vessel and facility security examinations, and will use these to randomly check the validity of an individual's TWIC. TSA and the Coast Guard continue to reach out to our private sector stakeholders in the interest of fashioning a regulation that strengthens America's maritime security while advancing commerce. While the TWIC program is multifaceted and includes numerous players, we're committed to developing an operationally sound framework that maximizes the security benefit the TWIC provides. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today, and I'll be happy to take your questions.
Thank you for your testimony. I now recognize Ms. Berrick to summarize her statement for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member King, and members of the committee for inviting me here to discuss GAO's work assessing TSA's efforts in implementing the TWIC program. My testimony will focus on the progress TSA has made in implementing TWIC and in responding to GAO's prior recommendations, and key remaining efforts that TSA and the maritime industry will need to address to help ensure the program's successful implementation. In September 2006, we reported that TSA and industry stakeholders faced several challenges in implementing TWIC. These challenges related to the enrollment and issuance of TWIC cards to a significantly larger population of workers than had been previously tested, ensuring that the access control technology required to operate TWIC works effectively in the maritime sector, and ensuring that background checks, appeals, and waivers for applicants of TWIC cards are processed in a timely manner. We also reported on problems TSA experienced in planning for and overseeing the contract to test TWIC. Based on our work, we recommended that TSA develop and test solutions to problems identified during initial testing, strengthen contract planning and oversight practices, and improve stakeholder coordination and outreach. Since our review, TSA has made much progress in addressing our prior recommendations and in meeting legislative requirements to test and implement the program. For example, TSA reported conducting performance testing of the technologies that will be used to enroll workers and has begun planning a pilot program to test TWIC access control technologies as required by legislation. TSA also hired additional staff with program and contract management expertise to help oversee the TWIC enrollment contract and developed additional controls to help ensure that contract requirements are met. TSA has also taken actions, along with the Coast Guard, to improve communication and coordination with maritime stakeholders. However, given the complexities of the program and its early stage of implementation, it will be important that TSA and the Coast Guard continue to work with industry stakeholders to test and monitor the program and to effectively address any challenges that arise. This focus is especially important given that key aspects of the program have not yet been fully tested or implemented. For example, TSA and its contractor will need to transition to full-scale enrollment covering at least 700,000 workers at about 3,500 maritime facilities and 5,300 vessels. While TSA and the contractor have begun initial enrollments, it remains to be seen how the TWIC enrollment and card issuance systems will perform during full-scale implementation. TSA and its enrollment contractor will also need to educate workers on new TWIC requirements and effectively and efficiently process numerous background checks, appeals, and waivers. Finally, TSA and industry stakeholders will need to ensure that TWIC access control technologies will work effectively in the maritime environment, be compatible with TWIC cards that will be issued, and ensure that facilities and vessels can effectively and economically obtain information on workers that may pose a threat. In closing, TSA has taken many steps to strengthen the development, implementation, and the oversight of the TWIC program, and we commend their efforts. While additional testing and other actions TSA have taken should address the problems we've previously identified, key aspects of the program have not yet been fully tested or implemented, and the effectiveness of these efforts will not be known until the program further matures. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my opening statement. I would be happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all the witnesses for their testimony. I'll remind each member that he or she will have 5 minutes to question the panel. I now recognize myself for questions. Mr. Hawley, we have 2 members from Florida on this committee who have raised at different points the issue of access cards and whether or not a policy by the department preempting access cards by states will in effect happen. Are you looking at it? Do you have a position? Can you share your the department's position at this point?
Yes, sir. On the issue of federal security requirements, that's what the TWIC card is. It says this individual is, we establish who the individual is by the biometric. We establish that individual is not a security risk for operating in sensitive areas of ports. That is the federal security requirement, and that is sufficient for those purposes. Other entities, including states, may have other purposes for issuing credentials, and the TWIC card does not get into that. So I actually don't think it's a preemption issue. It just is that our TWIC card is a limited purpose card for the purpose of security.
But you do understand that in most instances, that card would also give you access to the facility.
Clearly, there are cases, particularly in Florida, where there are other cards that they use for access. So one of the opportunities in TWIC is that when the access control portion comes in after the next rulemaking, that will then unify them together, and then they will also be able to be granted access for that purpose. Specifically with Florida, we're working very closely with them. They took a leadership position a couple of years ago, stepping out on security in their ports and issued identification for that, and we want to honor that work and work as closely as we can with them to make the two programs work in concert.
But you do understand that a trucker, for instance, might have to have 5 or 6 different access cards under this more or less open access rule.
Well, not from a security point of view. The point is that for security purposes of granting access, the Coast Guard designates where the secure access part is. We do the background check, issue the card, and then that's it for that trucker or anybody anywhere in the country. Since they are private entities, the private entities can require, perhaps differing things that we don't get into. But for a security purpose, this card does all for all employees at all facilities in the U.S.
I'll come back to it. Are you aware that a laptop was stolen from TSA on or about October 18th?
There was a laptop or laptops, or I'm not sure whether it was laptop or desktop, but that was stolen from a contractor. And I believe that that's in the process of, notifications being made.
Well, I guess my point is, but that contractor's job was to credential hazmat individuals. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
And I guess I'm going toward vulnerability.
Yeah.
And how have you set up a system under TWIC so that these kinds of situations won't happen, where laptops or other devices will be stolen and those credentials compromised?
Yes, sir. I think that is a critical question. And the example you cited, the hard drive on the stolen computer was encrypted as required by TSA. As from the learnings of previous incidents, we have required all contractors with access to personal data that those drives be encrypted. So while there was a criminal act of breaking and entering, stealing the computer hard drive, the information on it will be useless to them because of the encryption. And the TWIC program has the most advanced security. It's NSA standard security of encryption across the system. So I think that's one of the things that took so long with TWIC, was to get the security requirements very tight so that even in the event of criminal activity, it can't be compromised.
You also testified that if, in fact, the number of individuals needing credential would double or triple, that would not slow down the credentialing process.
Well, I can't say that it won't slow it down, but it would. We will meter the rolling out to meet the demand. So we will have the capacity in place. When we say we're going to show up at your port, we'll show up with the required resources to do that. If it's vastly more people than anybody predicted, it could have the effect of lengthening the enrollment period. But for New York, New Jersey, for instance, that enrollment period we're keeping open for 9 months. So I expect that it's just an issue of putting in more enrollment centers and the contractor adding additional enrollment stations to meet the demand. So in the short answer is I don't think it's a capacity problem at all.
Just for the record, we asked Ms. Fanger yesterday to provide us information on who the contractor that the department used to provide these projections that have come in significantly below expectations. And I'll have to renew that of you too.
Yes, sir. I can provide you the answer to that, and should you wish to do it during the hearing or afterwards, we have that information.
Thank you. I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, the gentleman from New York, Mr. King, for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Salerno, Chairman Thompson, in his opening statement, made reference to the fact that organized crime is now attempting to compromise the TWIC program. On the one hand, to me, it's a tribute in a way that organized crime is that concerned that they want to compromise the system. They realize this is a threat to them. On the other hand, it would be fatal if they were able to compromise the system, if they were able to produce counterfeits or duplicates. So is there, let me ask a two-part question. One, is there any evidence yet or any instance yet where the program has been compromised? And secondly, how confident are you that this program will be able to resist any attempts by organized crime or other criminal elements to compromise the program?
Sir, there is no evidence that organized crime has compromised the TWIC program. As far as our ability to prevent that, we would and have anticipated that there would be attempts by criminal elements of society to counterfeit this credential. And for that reason, the card is equipped with state-of-the-art tamper-resistant features, holograms, special inks that change color when the card is tilted, and so forth. I believe you're referring to a notice sent out by one of our units on the West Coast reporting some information that organized crime may seek to tamper or counterfeit these cards. The idea was to give a heads up to our facilities, our port partners, to be on alert for that, to make sure that they check those tamper-resistant features of the cards when they're presented for entry into a facility. We're very confident that these cards are highly resistant to any type of tampering or counterfeiting, and all it will take in the interim is alert security guards to make sure that they do due diligence when they grant access to people who are holding these cards.
Mr. Hawley, how confident are you?
Highly confident. This is the best that we have access to in the U.S. government, and I'm very confident it will resist attempts by organized crime or anyone else to successfully counterfeit the documents.
Thank you. Ms. Berrick, anytime the GAO is here, people always try to take parts of their testimony to use to prove a particular point, but I want to thank you for, I think, putting this issue in some perspective. Even the title of your remarks, TSA has made progress, but challenges remain. And in your concluding observations of the prepared testimony, you say that since you reported in September of 2006, TSA has made progress toward implementing the program, and you list a whole series, including issuing a TWIC rule, implementing requirements of the Safe Port Act, awarding a contract to enroll workers in the program, beginning to enroll workers in the program, and also taking actions to implement and test the program, and several other points. Let me ask you, how do you rate that type of progress? How cooperative do you see the department being, and what is your best guesstimate as to how successful this is going to be and what the time frame is going to be?
Sure, sir. In terms of the department's responsiveness to our work, I'm pleased with that. We made about 5 recommendations in our prior work, and TSA has taken action to implement those, and we're following up and working with them to assess those actions, so we're pleased with that. In terms of our forecast on the success of the program, I guess I would characterize it as cautiously optimistic. Again, TSA has taken some good steps in terms of contractor oversight, doing more system testing, reaching out to stakeholders as well as the Coast Guard. However, key aspects of the program still haven't yet been fully tested or implemented, the big one being the biometric access card reader, which will not be implemented probably for another 2 years or longer. Also, just the need to process background checks quickly, process the waivers, process the appeals can be a challenge given the number of workers. So I would say cautiously optimistic, good steps so far. We're pleased with their responsiveness to our recommendations, but just that key challenges are still out there given the stage of this program, and until the program further matures, it will be hard to determine whether or not it will be successful.
One final question. What's your impression of the outreach conducted by TSA and Lockheed Martin to the trucking industry as to what the requirements are and what the trucking industry has to do to comply with those requirements?
We've actually done some follow-up work where we've contacted some of the ports. We didn't contact the trucking industry specifically recently on that follow-up work, but during the follow-up work, the ports have been favorable about TSA and the Coast Guard's outreach with them. We talked to about 5 additional ports since our work was completed. When we had done our initial work, we visited 15 port facilities, talked to trucking operators and a lot of other stakeholders, and universally they were not pleased with the outreach at that time. This was about a year ago. But since that time, we've talked about some of the steps TSA and the Coast Guard have taken to strengthen outreach. We've gone back to some of these ports, and they've seen an improvement. But in terms of the trucking industry, we haven't talked to them recently to find out their level of satisfaction.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The chair now recognizes other members for questions they may wish to ask the witnesses. In accordance with our committee rules, I'll recognize members who were present at the start of the hearing based on seniority on the committee, alternating between majority and minority. Those members arriving in later will be recognized in the order of their arrival. Our chair now recognizes for 5 minutes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank all of you for being before us, and in particular to the administrator, who's I think has been listened to our recommendations, has been talking to us, and we're all trying to get this done. Mr. Hawley, do you think that waiting for 2 years to have the readers is going to compromise the card in the sense of, I mean, I've had people yesterday come and testify that said, you know, when a trucker comes through, the guard at the gate sits there and the guy flashes the card and he doesn't really even look at it and, you know, moves on. I mean, quite frankly, I've seen this at TSA to me, you know. Sometimes the guys really look at what the card is and sometimes the guys never look at the card. You just flash it by them. So if we don't have the reader, couldn't someone counterfeit a card and we'd be compromised?
Well, as to the airports, I can't resist and just say that there's a program that the Congress has supported for TSA to take over the document checking at the airport.
Yes,
so
I
those
had
are
that
now
done
TSA.
this
So that's
this
all.
week.
That's
Yes.
all happening. So on the issue you raise, I think it is an interesting issue, and frankly, when we came out with the proposed rulemaking, we had paired the card reader with the card issuance. And it was a result from the stakeholder feedback, which was loud and clear, that we separated the two. And then the Congress, in the Safe Port Act, came back and made that part of the law. So I think it's an interesting issue. I had been personally on the other side of it a year or so ago, but I think when you consider the total risk to the program and rolling out the cards that are now ready to go out and the advanced technology that's required to do the interoperable card reading, that it is, in fact, prudent to not take the technology risk. I mean, not wait to issue the cards for 2 years till that technology risk is done. So I think that as Admiral Salerno said, that the Coast Guard enforcement of the MITSA standards in these ports is an excellent security measure. These are Coast Guard officers going around the ports with biometric readers, and that for people who, there may be people who get in on a flash pass, but they're subject to being arrested by Coast Guard officers for, you know, if they're.
Would you yield just 30 seconds.
I will.
You know, what bothers me here is all of our defense bases have got handheld ID checkers. I mean, we have it at Andrews Air Force Base, the Trident Submarine Base, you know, and they work. Why aren't we using those in the interim so we have some capability?
Because this is a vastly different card than that kind of access reader. The TWIC card has more processing power on it than, actually twice as much processing power as that which the Apollo program used to put a person on the moon, and it fits in your car, in your shirt pocket. So the technology on this thing is extremely advanced because it has to allow any truck driver anywhere in the United States at any port, any MITSA facility to get in. So that is massive in terms of the flexibility required and the scalability. It is very different from a federal government Trident submarine-based card, and that is the complexity of the program.
I have two questions I'm going to try to get in. The first one is this whole issue of my longshoremen working up and down the state of California and different ports coming on at different times, and maybe one of the, and you know, they move around quite a bit depending on where the work is. So the first question I'll have is, what are you going to do about that? And the second issue, it has to do directly with the LA and Long Beach port, where they've decided to fund, the department has decided to fund the reader pilot program for them through the port security grant. And the port recently sent a letter to the secretary, to Chertoff, asking him to waive the 25% cost share requirement for the pilot, since all the TWIC pilots were fully funded by the government. So my question, the second question is, do you know where the secretary is on waiving the 25% cost share for the TWIC reader pilots?
Short version on the second part of the question, then Admiral Salerno can do the first part. We've got $22 million in the port security grants. We're putting that out there to try to provide support to the ports that are doing the implementation. That is enough for about 25%. I should also note that we don't have separate money within TSA to do the port pilots either, and that we're working within our resources to try to make it happen. So it's a typical debate about money. They're right, we want to support them as much as we can, but how do you spread the $22 million? And it basically is a 25% match. That's our view of what the security piece is. They've got to do access control anyway. So that's the issue, and it has not yet been resolved.
Admiral, back to what do you do about my longshoremen? Let's say Long Beach is already credentialed and has everything, but he's coming from, I don't know, SeaTac, and it hasn't been done yet. Therefore, he comes to the port for 7 days, and he doesn't have a card.
Yeah. Ma'am, the outreach to that community is to suggest that they obtain the TWIC card earlier than would be required in their home base, because they are mobile and they will be going to facilities that will have these access controls in place. If they know that that's
But if you're not going to have something at SeaTac for them to be able to do it?
They would need to enroll, and I believe there would be a facility up there for them to do that. I can verify on the locations for you on the West Coast.
I mean, I don't know. You really haven't given us, we haven't gotten a real good indication, really, of when the start dates are at the different ports. But I can just envision, I mean, that I will have workers who will be, you know, and it's on a weekly basis. I mean, sometimes they show up and there's no work on Monday, and there's work down in Long Beach. So they go from they drive down from Oakland down to Long Beach. So they end up at Long Beach and they don't have the TWIC card.
Well, so for the way the process works is the captain of the port issues a statement saying you have 90 days to comply, and they won't do that in a port until they've had significant time to enroll anybody who reasonably is likely to have been there. So there's the deployment of the enrollment of the cards, which in Seattle I just looked up is also starting this year. But the real teeth to it won't come until a captain of the port issues the requirement that says 90 days from now you've got to have a card to get in here. So that is exactly what they'll be taking into account, is the operational feasibility of how many people at a given port have had a chance to get their TWIC card. And if they're not able to, either through pre-enrollment or showing up earlier, they will be able to at these large ports, particularly LA Long Beach, for months and months and months going into 2008.
Okay, well, I see that my time has run out. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, but I want to follow up at some point with that.
Okay, thank you very much. We now recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Dent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, Mr. Hawley, one of the requirements of the Safe Port Act that we passed last year was to conduct a threat assessment of all truck drivers entering the port. We understand that TSA plans on meeting this requirement by doing a check against the terror watch list and the immigration status database of all commercial driver's license holders. What is the status of that requirement?
We're working out MOUs with the individual states who are the holders of the CDLs, and there are different formatting issues and different legal and privacy issues for each of those states. So we're working that on a parallel track with TWIC, and the TWIC card has already got the operational issues worked out, the privacy issues worked out, so that when we go port by port, it will, by definition, pick up the truckers who service those ports. When we get the MOUs done with a substantial number of states and are able to run the CDLs independently, then we'll have a much broader check. So to meet the requirements in the Safe Port Act, I suspect the way this is going to roll out is in accordance with the TWIC rollout. However, we are cognizant of the larger population of CDLs and wanting to run that as soon as we practically can, given the data.
As a follow-up, I know my friend Governor Castle is here, but what issues have there been in the first 2 weeks of enrollment at the Port of Wilmington, and how have you at TSA responded to those challenges?
Well, I think the cooperation of the port and local community has been outstanding. All the parties, including the unions, it has so far been successful. I think there are a lot of miniature issues that show up in terms of the card issuance and technical things that we're working through. But as far as I know, there are not significant issues that have come up to this point.
We've been hearing that there have been some difficulties with fingerprints activating the TWIC card in Wilmington. Is that a minor thing that can be resolved? Or is it?
Yes, a lot of times it has to do with educating the individuals as to what's required in terms of getting the prints down. And my understanding in some particular cases that a quick refresher in how to do it have resolved the questions. There's no technological problem with it. It's the standard user issue.
And finally, as you know, the TWIC card provides an individual with unescorted access to secure areas of facility, but however, an individual adjudicated by TSA to be a threat to the point where a TWIC card is denied, but that person could be escorted by a TWIC'd individual into a secure area. To what extent would an escort be liable for the non-TWIC'd individual who's entering that secured area?
Short answer is I don't know on the legal liability, so we'll check on the answer to that. I should point out, though, that the FBI has a thoroughly robust investigatory process, so anybody who's an active terror risk that is known to the U.S. government is already well in the FBI process. So as soon as one is identified, it would be resolved principally by the FBI.
Thank you. I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. We now recognize the gentleman from Oregon for 5 minutes, Mr.
Thank you,
DeFazio.
Mr. Chairman, and thank Ms. Harmon for letting me proceed, or I have to go to a markup. A very quick question regarding the costs, Mr. Hawley. I don't quite understand, and they aren't exactly congruent, so it's hard for me to tell, but generally the costs of issuing a background, doing background checks on a card, our background checks $27 and a card can be $0 to $50 for airport workers, and here we're up to $132.50. And I guess I'm just curious what accounts for the discrepancy, because we have the $43.25 for information collection credential issuance, Lockheed Martin, and then we have the $72 for complete security threat assessment and card production. What's different here?
It's the biometric and the security measures that are on top of it. The TWIC card is a state-of-the-art with...
Right, so we're basically recouping the costs of the physical card and or the, taking the photograph and getting the other biometrics into the card and all those sorts of things.
Yes, and the contractor cost for doing it.
Right, so the difference might be, again, I just would point to the fact that it seems a bit high, and I'm not quite certain, since the 7250 then would account for that, but the credential information collection and credentialing issuance is about $16 more by Lockheed Martin than it is for the airports. So, and I don't know. I guess that's profit.
Well, it's the technology. It's all the sophisticated protections that Admiral Salerno mentioned, plus the technology embedded on the chip.
Okay, I'm still not quite certain of that, but with that, I'd yield the balance of my time to Ms. Harmon. And I do think you've dispatched yourself well and answered a number of questions here today. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, what I would prefer is just to ask questions next when you come back to our side.
Thank you very much. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Delaware, Mr. Castle.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity of being here. I appreciate that, and I appreciate the testimony of the witnesses. And we're very concerned at how this is working out at Wilmington. We are the largest banana port importer, and obviously have a lot of people there with a lot of concerns. But one of the questions I'd like to raise is the card readers, which, did you testify, it will not start until next summer, is that correct?
The reader pilot's going on in the early part of '08. There will not be requirements to implement them until probably 2 years after the start.
Could individual ports do this on their own, or does it have to be coordinated through Homeland Security? And if so, could they use Homeland grant funds to do so?
Access control systems today can be used with TWIC cards, depending on the port and the kind of technology being used. The key thing that has to wait is the interoperability. We just issued the technical standards in September that will go for interoperability, and that won't be available until that final rule is done.
The chairman mentioned, I think in his opening statement, the concept of crime, organized crime, getting involved with this. When you have the card readers, it would seem to me that would reduce the possibility of crime. Just having a card could be replicated in some way or another, but it seems to me the card reader would offset that in that you would have to be entered in that. Am I correct in that assumption, or can that?
The card reader would definitely be effective, but we also are using, as Admiral Salerno said, handheld card readers by the Coast Guard. So that is effective security, and that will be.
And if I could add to that, sir, the situation today is that a facility can grant access to an individual with a variety of IDs. It could be a driver's license, which of course does not have a background check or any biometric. So, and any type of photo ID can be used in most cases. So we're compressing this down from this plethora of cards to one that is a standard with features on it that make it tamper-proof. So it is a quantum leap in security just by having this one card, even without the readers.
Good. In my state of Delaware, at the Port of Wilmington, I went down there the first day and learned that enrollment has been fairly high. I thought they were going to try and enroll me at one moment there. But my concern then, and it was stated by a couple people there, is individuals who might have a background issue and therefore may choose to wait or be a little leery about registering or whatever it may be. How do we, what are we doing with respect to those individuals? The statement was made that we're looking for terrorists, not people who may have had a background problem sometime in the distant past. And what are we doing to accommodate and to give assurance to make sure they're stepping forward so those problems can be resolved and they don't all come upon us at the end of any enrollment period at a particular port?
I think hearings like this are excellent at getting the word out. This is not something to be concerned about for all but a very small handful of people. And the thing I would say is, if you get something that indicates there might be a problem, call back and come in and as the chairman mentioned at the beginning, if the data that's in the government system does not include that you have a favorable disposition, just come back and document that, and the issue goes away. So this is really the principal point of trust we have to earn as we go through here, that people's experience matches what I just said.
Good. We have, in our port, and that's probably true of a lot of other ports too, we have rushes on things. I mentioned fruit already, and during fruit season we'll have casual seasonal labor, which is basically picked up and comes to the port to work. Will these people need to be escorted, or could they be temporary seasonal passes, or will they have to go through the full TWIC process? How will that be handled?
Sir, if they're operating in the secure area of the facility, handling cargo on a regular basis, we would expect them to obtain TWICs. If there are people that are operating maybe on a one-time only case, maybe doing repair work at the facility, we can cordon off a portion of that facility and make it non-secure in effect.
So they might be able to work. It's just that there's certain access they would not have because they don't have the full TWIC clearance and all of that. Just very quickly, in just working with the officials at the Port of Wilmington and working with the unions and the people there, it seemed to me they had a lot of valuable input in terms of what we are doing. Do you have a full communication system with them to make sure you're picking up their ideas and concepts and reviewing them?
Yes, sir, and that's part of the learning that we use to base the rest of the program on. And again, they've been, really spectacular in terms of working with us and openly engaging.
And I'll add to that, sir. Obviously, there's outreach to national level organizations that have constituencies throughout all the states, but also at the port level, there are entities we call area maritime security committees, where the people who operate in that particular port get together and they work through security issues, and that is a conduit of information back to our headquarters level.
Good. I thank the panel, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We now recognize the gentlelady from California for 5 minutes, Ms. Harmon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for this series of hearings, including the one that Ms. Sanchez held yesterday, which unfortunately I could not attend because I had a markup in another committee. I want to thank the witnesses as well, especially Mr. Hawley, for his great effort to be responsive to requests, at least from this member, for help and aid, and for his risk-based approach to transportation safety, which has made him a target from time to time, but I think he's on the right path. My district, as I think most people on this committee know and the panel knows, it surrounds the Port of LA and is adjacent to the Port of Long Beach. That port complex is the largest port complex in the country. Almost 50% of our container traffic goes through it, and we absolutely have to get TWIC right. I'm also a co-author of the Safe Ports Act with Mr. Lundgren. This committee was enormously helpful in moving that legislation, which passed the House 421-2 and the Senate 98-0, which I would call a near miracle in these times. So the Safe Ports Act connects to TWIC by insisting that it be part of a layered approach to port safety. Having said all that, and having listened to you and listened to the questions by members, my question is, have we made this too complicated? Have we made it too complicated in our legislation, or are you making it too complicated in your rollout? Obviously, all of us agree that we need these cards. I think all of us would agree we need the biometric feature in these cards. All of us agree we need portability, but is there something now we or you, or we and you together, could do to make this easier and maybe even less costly?
I think that is an excellent question, and I think the answer is it is complex, and we've paid the price for it in terms of how long it's taken to get right. So I think the point is a very strong one. And with Secretary Chertoff, we had this conversation with Secretary Chertoff as we were going through this plan a year ago. And that's why we did the watch list checking on all the port workers at that time. So he asked exactly the question you asked, which is, what can we do right now that's simpler and can increase security? And it was the watch list checks. We've also, with the Coast Guard, cooperated with what we call these Viper teams, where we have different parts of DHS come in support of the Coast Guard as they do their MITSA enforcement. So these are programs that are ongoing that provide additional security. And frankly, now we've got the legislative requirements of what the TWIC card has to be. We've gone down the path. we are not out of the woods yet in terms of, particularly on the card reader, what the complexity of that's going to end up being. And we're going to have the same issue again on, do we move forward fast, or do we take the time and the heat to get the technical issues resolved?
Well, let me just, we've seen a program done wrong, SBInet. We had a hearing on that a week or so ago where the contractor took it to the field before it was ready. But this member is very worried that tomorrow morning we could easily have a major terrorist attack by someone who should not be at one of our ports. And if a major port complex like LA Long Beach has an attack and closes, that's a devastating impact on our national economy, not just our local Southern California economy. So we have to be smart about this. Perfection is not an option, but trying to take the right steps quickly is the requirement. I'd like to ask the other witnesses to comment on my question. Are we making this too complicated? Are we making this too complicated, or are you making this too complicated?
Sure. If I could start here, I would make 2 points. One, there are a lot of complexities with this program. Each port is unique, as you very well know, and this is a sophisticated program that involves complexities. The second point I wanted to make is equally important is the management of the program. And our past work has identified that there has been problems in that area. The contract requirements at the beginning of this program weren't fully defined. The contract cost doubled. There was very limited oversight over the contract itself. The prototype testing for TWIC when this program started was very limited. Very little testing had been done. There was virtually no testing of access control technologies. So that, I think, is also a problem that needs to be...
Why was that? Why didn't they test access control? It's out there.
Yeah. During the prototype testing, the reasons that we heard during our site visits was that there weren't a lot of volunteer ports that were signing up to do that during the initial testing. They didn't want to invest a lot of money not knowing what the final requirements would be. So the testing was really limited on the access controls. But if I could just add one more point, we made recommendations based on our work that TSA go back, do the testing, work with the stakeholders, which was another issue we had identified. And they have taken lots of actions in those areas. We haven't gone back to assess the effectiveness of those efforts. We've gotten some positive feedback on the coordination side, though.
Well, reclaiming my time, which has expired, I would just like to say to Ms. Berrick in particular, I know you're a Virginia Tech graduate, therefore you're very talented. I think it is important not to point fingers about what went wrong. I think it is very important to take a deep breath, be sensible, and get this right as soon as possible. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. We now yield 5 minutes to the gentlelady from the Virgin Islands, Ms. Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Before I ask a question, I'd like to just say to the Coast Guard representative, Admiral Salerno, that I noticed that Saipan in the Northern Marianas is one of the enrollment sites scheduled to come online in mid-next year. And as chair of the Subcommittee on Insular Affairs of Natural Resources, and which is in the process of bringing federal immigration laws to Saipan, I'd be very interested in hearing how that process unfolds in Saipan and any issues that may arise or problems that may arise as you do so. I have a question because on the Florida issue, because I'm afraid I'm not understanding something. It's my understanding that the Department of Homeland Security does not intend to preempt the Florida FUPAC. Yet there are a number of crimes that disqualify an applicant under TWIC but do not disqualify under FUPAC, such as sedition, espionage, improper transportation of a hazardous material. Those are not disqualifying in the Florida program, but they are disqualifying in TWIC. So could you, Mr. Hawley and maybe Admiral Salerno, explain why you're not preempting it?
The list of crimes is statutorily fixed, so that we're set with that. We have the requirement of what we enforce. So the security requirement for the federal security clearance is set. The issue of preemption is complicated in that there's nothing that prevents Florida or any state from having its own requirements, and that's what we're working with the state of Florida on now, and there are some privacy issues and data, exchange issues to try to harmonize that. But we do have the federal law is what it is on that, and that's what will prevail on the actual convictions. But the card itself, they have the authority to issue cards for a variety of purposes.
But for qualifying to work at the ports, or which is going to be required?
Well, if you're disqualified.
In Florida.
Yeah, so if you're disqualified and go through the appeals process and don't make it, then you would not have access to the secure areas.
So having a FUPAC card will not qualify you if you don't qualify under TWIC.
We don't. The FUPAC card won't replace TWIC. In other words, the TWIC requirements have to go in, but we're very cognizant of the work Florida has already done. In fact, leading area in many respects, and don't want to disincent them or otherwise cause difficulty for them based on their getting out in front. So we're trying to work with them to get the solution that meets our legislative need, our statutory need, and their operating need.
Well, we'd like to hear when you reach that point, how that has happened. And also, Administrator Hawley, it's my understanding that the Homeland Security Department is considering how to fit TWIC standards into requirements it's developing for the Western Hemisphere Initiative. For that People's Access Security Service card. The Commissioner of Customs and Border Protection recently said that CBP sees significant benefit for TWIC card holders to be able to use the credentials to enter the United States. So is the department going to implement a plan whereby the TWIC card could be used as a credential to enter the United States?
Well, I think that's why we have the screening coordination office at the department, and that is one of the things they look at is once you've done vetting in one scenario to make sure you get the same result in all the others, and it deals with the so-called DHS trip, which gets to redress issues. So the answer is anybody vetted in any one part of DHS according to what those standards are would get the benefit of that that approval or that consistent answer anywhere else. Now, there are a lot of operating issues where, as we mentioned, TWIC is complicated in and of itself, and the WITI is its own issue. So I think on the threat resolution area, that's the easy part. The hard part would be on aligning the technologies.
Okay, I'd be interested in hearing how that works out in its final implementation or what the decision is as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. We now recognize the gentleman from Washington for 5 minutes, Mr. Dix.
I want to go back to the reader aspect of this thing. I happen to have a company in my district called Mobilisa, and they are one of a number of companies that does this. And we've been just emailing them, and they do it for cards of this complexity. They can do the TWIC card. And what I'm having a hard time understanding is why would we not want to get the readers as quickly as possible when there is technology out there that's already been demonstrated at all of our defense bases, Andrews, where the president flies in and out of. Fort Dix didn't have this. Now they've got it. West Point. I mean, this is not rocket science. And they check these things against all of the databases, and they can tell whether it's a fake card or a real card. Why wouldn't we at least go out and get some of this technology and test it? I don't get this. It just seems like a major flaw in what you're doing.
Well, that's why the pilot is.
We don't need a pilot.
Well, we just had the conversation about the need. This is one of the requirements and the recommendations of the whole process is that before we issue the technology, we got to test it.
Okay, why don't you test it? Why haven't you done that? You were supposed to have done it by April. April was the deadline in the legislation. It hasn't been done. Why was it not done? If the technology's out there, this isn't like you have to invent something, Mr. Hawley. It's already there. Why haven't we gotten started? Can you tell me, Admiral Salerno, why we haven't gotten started on this?
Well, sir, we have gotten started.
Do you know about these companies that are out there that have handheld technology that could check these TWICs right now?
We do know that there is technology out there. What had to happen was the publication of a standard so that manufacturers can build to that standard.
Wait a minute. Why do you have to? This is a typical military approach to this. Why don't you tell them what you want and let them come back and respond and give you what they've got, and you can then see if it's up to your standard?
Well, that, in effect, is what the publication of the standard does, sir, so that it will allow commercial companies to build capability to that.
But I'm just saying, they're already out there. Why haven't you brought them in? Why haven't you talked to them? Why haven't you let them demonstrate their technology already? Why didn't you have a fair? The Defense Department finally figured this out, and bring all these companies in and see what they've got and see if you can use it right away. I'm with Ms. Harmon. I think you guys are making this too complex. Now, I'm worried that it's about who pays for it. That's the real underlying issue here, and that you want them to pay for it. They don't want to pay for it. Therefore, we're not doing it. And that's what's worrisome here to me. We should be having these readers. This is a major problem with this program, and they're out there.
Sir, I would just point out that we do have constraints based on the law.
What are the constraints?
The law requires that we conduct a pilot program specifically for readers.
But does it tell you exactly how to do it? Why wouldn't you bring them in? If you had these companies come in and talk to you, have you interviewed them to see what capabilities currently exist off the shelf that might meet your requirement? No. You haven't done that, have you?
The standards just went out for the first time, and this is the leading technology. There's nobody else on Earth that has got a program as advanced as this. So we are absolutely talking to all comers, and there are a lot of people who say they have it ready. The answer is show up in the port and demonstrate it that it works. And
when is that going to be, Mr. Hawley?
It'll be in early 2008. And
I think that's way too long. If you could do it now, why wouldn't you do it now?
Because it depends on the companies being able to come back and say, yes, we can meet these standards. They look at the standards published in September. They've got to do the programming. They've got to do the assembly. They've got to do the testing. And they've got to show up. So it's not the government who's doing this. This is actually the model that you were suggesting.
No, I think it's the right model, except I think the people are there already, and this is a lot of complexity to get started when we could have gotten started already by bringing them in and see what they've got and see if they can meet your requirements already without going through all of this. I mean, Congress, I think we could reconsider this in either the appropriations bill or another bill if that is a constraint. I would rather see you get now, Ms. Berrick, do you know anything about this? Are you aware of these companies that are out there that say they've got the technology to do this, to check these cards, these TWIC cards?
Yeah, we didn't look at that aspect during our work. We focused on the prototype testing, and related to the access control card readers, we said that there was very limited testing during the prototype, and we actually recommended that some additional testing be done before implementation. So we think testing is important. We didn't look at the different ways that TSA and the Coast Guard could approach that, though.
Couldn't they start this right now if they wanted to?
I'm sorry, I really don't know based on the work that we've done.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Just for the record, I think, Mr. Dix, the TWIC card was 5 years in the making. At some point, you would have expected along that 5-year wait, if the reader was also to be a part of it, that you could have had a dual system in place. And I think the concern of the committee is that the 5-year rollout start. Now we have another 2.5 years before the reader is complete. And so we probably got an 8-year process before we
would you ask him if they would answer that one, Mr. Chairman, why they didn't do that?
Mr. Hawley?
Well, it has to do with the government-wide biometric standard that is interoperable. It's described as FIPS 201, and we made the decision that we wanted to abide by the government-wide standards on biometric interoperability. So that was the first step that we said with a card has got to be FIPS 201 compliant. Then the next issue is on the reader, whether the reader is got to be compatible just with a contact card, or whether you can allow contactless, which is much more efficient, you know, sort of a proximity pass, so to speak. So that we elected to go, based on the comments that we got, to get the contactless card that's interoperable. That's what we just published in September. So these are standards that don't exist anywhere in the world. NIST only has come out with the contact ones. So we are leading. This is leading edge stuff here, and that's why it's not available off the shelf.
Ms. Harmon.
Yeah, thank you for yielding to me. Just for a follow-up question on this, did you know, Mr. Hawley, when you made these decisions, that it would take this long to get this implemented? And I'm sure you're aware of the threats against us. So I'm just wondering if you chose to spend 5 to 7 years trying to get this right.
The key point is we're not waiting on TWIC card issuance or reader issuance for port security, and Admiral Salerno can address that.
I agree with your concern and sympathize with your concern, Congresswoman, about port security. That's very much a concern of the Coast Guard, and TWIC is a big part of the solution to that. But there are certainly other measures that have been in place since MTSA and even prior to MTSA to improve port security. This will be a significant step forward. Would we have liked to have had it sooner? Absolutely. But we're getting it right, I think, is the correct approach.
Thank you. We yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just prior to coming over here, I had some folks from Louisiana who were involved in offshore boat operations, and they were real concerned about the Baker Amendment to the Coast Guard reauthorization bill. Are y'all familiar, Admiral, with this amendment? And it has to do with TWIC cards, and it has to do with their people, or Ms. Secretary, being able to do some private 90-day background checks that I understand is going to go through the same process that the TSA would go through, or that our department would go through. Can y'all tell me about that? And is there some mechanism of allowing not only them but other private sources at least to get temporary authorization to allow port security that is going to maintain the port security?
Yes, sir, I am familiar with the proposal. Let me back up a little bit, though. The regulations that were published several months ago do contain a new hire provision, so that a new employee, if he applies for a TWIC, will be allowed to go to work on an interim basis. They need to be monitored in the workplace, but can go to work. And that was in response to requests from industry to include a provision of that nature. What Mr. Baker is proposing is somewhat different in that he would allow people to go to work for up to 90 days without having to first apply for a TWIC. So there's no security check pending the issuance of the card itself. You could work for 90 days without any check whatsoever. We have significant problems with that. It creates a vulnerability that, quite honestly, we do not have good means to address.
Well, from what I understand from the folks that I was just talking to, they do an internal security check. They use the same internet process of doing an internal company-based check. Is there some mechanism of being able to do that for new hires so that that if they have some kind of mitigation about these new employees, so that we're absolutely certain that we're not hiring terrorists, we're not hiring thugs, we're hiring people who will be secure, but that they'll have 90 days or 60 days or some reasonable period of time that the new hires that they can see, but we can see also from Homeland Security perspective that these people are safe. Is there some way of working this out so that when industry, whether it's in Louisiana or New York or Los Angeles, can can hire a truck driver or hire an individual. Is there some way of having private security background checks that is acceptable to the department that will allow these people to come on board while they're in the process of getting their TWIC card or without having to pay the fee to be able to get the TWIC card over a reasonable period of time, whatever that might be?
The regs in place now, sir, do in fact include a provision where the employer does a background check. That's part of the new hire provision. But I think the key distinction is that as it's currently constructed, there's a requirement to apply for TWIC. If the name goes into the federal system, there's a quick check against some databases to make sure that there's no obvious problems, against a terrorist watch list and so forth. And once we have that, which can be accomplished relatively quickly, the person's allowed to work. Under this other provision, that federal check does not take place, and we do not necessarily have the same visibility of who is actually out there in the workplace.
Excuse me, Admiral, for interrupting you because my time's about out. How long does it take you to go through the quick check process and that you can get the information back to the employer about these new hires?
A few days.
I think we're estimating a couple of days. Okay. So the business process that you're referring to, I think, is contemplated that we can do the terror watch list check that the government has to do, and not inhibit the guy starting while that process goes. So they've got some provision for that, but we do need to run the terror watch list check before having the person.
Well, I certainly want that too, and it's just, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, a few more seconds here, but. I certainly want anybody who's working in secure areas and ports to make sure, for us to make sure that they're not a hazard to this nation. But I think there may be some reasonable way of doing this and getting people to work, whether they're working in offshore boats or whether they're driving a truck or something else. So I am out of time, and I thank you all for coming, and I thank you for Mr. Chairman for giving me a few extra moments.
Thank you very much. We yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Etheridge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me thank you for being here this morning and for your answers. Mr. Hawley, as you know, there currently is a shortage of labor available at ports, to work at ports as well as in surface transportation. And as it's been described today in your testimony and others, there are some burdens that we're trying to overcome this hurdle of TWICs. And let me just go through them very quickly among them and then ask my question. Number one is the cost, because in the case of some of these people, it may be equivalent to a day's wage. For some of us, that may not sound like a lot, but for some it is. You touched on that a little bit earlier. The shortage of enrollment sites and the staff to process those applications, the underestimating of the number of TWIC cards required, and possibly delays due to incorrect information in the criminal database and the watch list. And so my question is, as developing this, did you consider the burden of regulation and the procedure on the industry itself at the port, and if you did or didn't, what steps have been taken to mitigate these efforts? Because, sometimes you find out you've got a problem, then what have you done to correct that problem as you move along in the process?
Sir, I think those all raise good points. On the issue of the cost, one of the things, clearly that came up early, and the mitigation for that is we have in fact reduced the cost from when we first came out with it. And it is, I should point out, a 5-year period, which is about $26 a year. So it is, $132 is not something trivial, but over a 5-year period, it's at least in the ballpark. On the issue of the enrollments, we covered that a little bit earlier, but essentially the way the contract is written, the cost model incents the provider who's doing the enrollment to get as many enrollments as fast as possible, and it can be scaled up because they get paid for the cards. So that's built into the mechanism. And the same thing on the enrollment stations. As far as the criminal checks, the current process on hazardous material endorsement came through a lot of the credibility problems when that was rolling out. Hey, is this going to slow down the business? And in fact, it has not. And I think it probably is the #1 issue for us going forward to demonstrate to particularly this population that getting a TWIC card is not onerous and is not going to be a problem of people fishing around in your background. We're basically saying, are you terrorist risk and limited criminal history information, and we're not trying to figure out all possible problems.
Well, turnaround is critical, but at the same time, you need to make sure you've got the information right. Ms. Berrick, did you, in your looking at this, see any evidence that the stakeholder community was involved or had any input in the development of the TWIC requirements that were put in place?
Sure, and again, to reiterate, the focus of our review was on the prototype for the TWIC program, which ended about a year ago. And one of the areas we looked at was stakeholder coordination and outreach. We visited 15 ports, talked to all the involved stakeholders. The message we were getting at that time, a year ago, was that they wanted more involvement in the requirements. They wanted to work more closely with TSA and the Coast Guard. So that was their position at that time. Since that time, TSA and the Coast Guard have put in several measures to improve coordination. They established a coordination steering committee. They have frequently asked questions, posted a whole series of actions.
So the answer is yes.
Well, we went back to follow up. We spoke with a few ports, and they did indeed say they thought stakeholder coordination had improved. We haven't done a comprehensive review to see how effective all of these procedures were, but the limited input we got was that it was favorable.
Thank you. Ports have invested significant resources in developing credential systems over the years, and as a result of legislation, both in response to the internal threat assessments and to comply with state as well as federal regulations. Mr. Hawley, how has this been taken into consideration with the federal TWIC regulations and requirements? And how will that be compatible, if at all possible, with what's already in place or requirements that some of these ports already have and have had for a while?
I think that your comment is consistent with what we heard from the community during the rulemaking process, and we did in fact change the whole process to separate out the reader part from the card issuance, and the reader part is the substantial cost to the ports as they implement, what is required. So we had originally said you got to do it at the same time as we issue the cards. Based on the technology issues and the feedback, we separated the two.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much. We now recognize the gentleman from Colorado for 5 minutes, Mr. Perlmutter.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Hawley, I won't talk about baseball since my team didn't fare very well against yours. So, but I do want to, just get some basics again. And I'm not, I haven't been around here for all of the TWIC discussion for 5 years. You said in the card that the card has double the information as we had in the Apollo program in terms of the computerized information. What are some of the things that are on that card?
It's got a computer chip inside, and it has all the identity information, and it's storing the biometric information. So it's got the prints, which, as you know, is if you just have the list of information about somebody, it takes up a tiny amount of computing process. But having the actual fingerprints in there as well takes up a lot of space, so both in terms of the amount of data stored and the quickness with which it can be processed and fed back is principally what's in there. There's also there's encryption and security measures that are built on as well. So there's the chip itself, which is the most expensive part of the technology. Then there's the additional pieces of security on the plastic itself. There's also a mag stripe and a visible card reader, a barcode on the card.
And I would assume that over time, if there are other things that your agency thinks might be appropriate, there's room to add that.
Yes, sir. On the mag stripe, I think a third of it is kept empty for use of ports or people who want to do dual use. It also is what's called backward compatible, meaning that if things change in the future, it is capable of accommodating that if that's necessary.
Now, I know one of the things we've been talking about is how many people are going to be issued these cards. I mean, what is the number that the TSA thinks, and then, Ms. Berrick, what is the number that the GAO thinks are going to be using this card? And is it just ports, or is it ports and airports? Who is it?
We've got a range of low side 750,000, high side maybe $1.5 million. But as far as the practical capacity of the program, it is scalable to $1.5 million or higher than that, should that be necessary.
And is that just seaports, or what?
No, that includes the truckers as well as the mariners and the port workers.
Not airports.
Not airports.
Is it possible that it would be used at airports at some point?
It is possible. That is something that we're working with the airports. The question is whether we can accommodate the biometric on the existing SIDA badge and whether that's the right business process for doing it. But
Ms. Berrick.
In terms of the port population, we didn't do an independent assessment of the number. I can say, however, talking to the stakeholders, they did raise some concerns that the population was higher, but we didn't do an independent assessment of how higher that might be, or if in fact that's true, if it was low.
Just change the subject a little bit. This was a question from Mr. Carney, and it goes back to the laptop that was taken. His question was, we assume that the encryption software protects, but has the hard drive been recovered and have forensics been done on the hard drive?
I don't know is the short answer. So we'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank you very much. We have two members left for questions, and the plan is to recess for the 3 votes and reconvene after that. Ms. Jackson-Lee from Texas for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman very much. Let me quickly proceed and say that I know that this scheme is one that Congress gave you, and we know that you're carrying forward a roadmap. So we thank you for your service, but at the same time, we are quite perplexed as to why it is in the state that it is today, even as you have answered questions on some of our concerns. And my question is whether or not we will, in fact, be ready for the rollout again. And I will, under that umbrella, ask these questions very quickly. I am delighted that Houston is one of the selectees, but in fact, your witness yesterday, Maureen Fangay, said that this process with ports like Houston is to get it right. And so my question is, why is Houston and why the other ports being used at this stage of the game as a guinea pig? We're also concerned that a number of the workers mentioned yesterday that they have had no training, particularly ILA workers. They're concerned about the FBI rap sheet and its accuracy, what has been done to make sure that that occurs. And we've talked about the state proposals, and we've sort of accepted it, but it seems like a double standard. Why do you have, and this is for both Ms. Admiral Salerno and Mr. Hawley, why do you have this double standard of allowing states to go forward and then allowing TSA or requiring the TSA TWIC card, but then states as well can require additional procedures? It seems like this is a double standard and it's an excessive burden. Finally, let me note that you suggested there are 750,000 potential enrollees. We've been told that by one of your providers or contractors, it may be more. And frankly, we don't feel that you are prepared for more because you haven't acknowledged it. I also want to thank the Coast Guard for their work on this project, but I asked the question, as TSA rolls this out and the Coast Guard is responsible for enforcement, I don't see why we don't have a relationship with Customs and Border Protection. In fact, who is going to be the arresting officer if it is necessary, if it is a terrorist, if you found a terrorist? I don't think you have a coordinated program. I don't know how the Coast Guard, with its basic duties, can be involved in the law enforcement aspect of it, and I think that is a major problem. So we can begin, Mr. Hawley, with you on, on the double standard question in Admiral Salerno, and then the enrollee question, as well as the guinea pig issue and what you're doing about training the employees and helping them as well.
On the which issue? Oh, the double standard. Okay. On that issue, the state of Florida moved out to put in security measures on its own while talking to us. They did so knowing that the TWIC program was coming. They elected to go forward and implement security measures in Florida ports, which is a laudable decision and laudable result. It did not and does not meet all of the subsequently developed requirements under TWIC. So what we're trying to do, it's not a double standard. There is one standard. It is the TWIC standard. What we're trying to do is work with Florida to have a common sense solution that recognizes the work they've already put in, but doesn't compromise our statutory responsibility.
Can I quickly go to Admiral Salerno, or either you can continue on about the FBI rap sheet, excuse me, the FBI rap sheet, and if you want to continue because the time is going.
On the FBI rap sheet, that's something that came up a little earlier. The answer is that's why we have the process that the person, if they do get a response back that says there's a problem, they just need to get back to us and say, but it has been resolved. And this has worked well on the hazmat endorsement issue. We expect it to
I think we need to have something more secure than that. Admiral Salerno, do you have an answer to the question of the double standard and also your enforcement abilities?
On the double standard issue, the Coast Guard enforces MTSA on the facilities, and what we will enforce for on facilities is the TWIC. That is our standard. That's what we will hold the facility.
So you have enough resources to have personnel on the ground in these ports across America?
Not on a continuous presence basis, but on a roaming basis. They will make frequent visits to these ports and spot check.
I think that's a concern, Mr. Chairman, not because the Admiral's not dedicated, but because I don't think there are enough resources, and I don't think that there's been planning for enough resources on this matter.
If I might add, ma'am, you asked the question too about arrests and so
yes,
forth. We are working with other law enforcement agencies to establish agreements, memorandums of understanding, so that we can leverage this requirement out, across the board, including with local law enforcement authorities as well. So there may in fact be law enforcement presence from other agencies there that can act if the Coast Guard is not present.
Okay. Well, we'll get a briefing on that. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
More questions, Ms. Jackson. If you submit them, we'd be happy to get them answered. Gentlelady from New York, Ms. Lowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be brief because I know we have the votes waiting. Before I get to my question, I just want to ask Administrator Hawley, I'm puzzled. You keep saying as an excuse for the delays that there is twice as much technology in a TWIC card than the Apollo mission. The Apollo mission was 40 years ago. I would hope that there's a lot more technology today that you would have access to and that the technology would have improved. So I don't think that is a good excuse. But let me go to the question that I have. With regard to the ports of New York, New Jersey, Long Beach, and Los Angeles as part of the initial rollout of the TWIC program, if the overall purpose, Administrator Hawley, of the TWIC program is to secure our ports, why was the decision made to exclude the ports servicing New York and Los Angeles during the initial rollout? And could you detail the risk factors used to identify the 10 priority ports? And Ms. Berrick, do you believe the country would be substantially safer had the initial TWIC rollout included the largest and highest risk ports in the country? Since I have 3 minutes, 46 seconds, perhaps we'll begin with Administrator Hawley, and then if Ms. Berrick has time, you can respond.
Sure. The answer is on the importance of New York, New Jersey, and LA Long Beach. We announced yesterday the 147 port schedule, and as you may have seen, New York, New Jersey is scheduled to begin this year. The risk factor is there's also program risk. We talked about some of the learnings we're having in the Port of Wilmington, and we don't want to start out in the toughest of the environments, the largest scale of the environments. We want to learn as we go and control the program so that when we get at the major, largely scalable ports, we've worked out the...
If I could just interrupt for 1 second, because I noticed your schedule. It's scheduled for a partial rollout at the end of the year. The full rollout will not be complete in the region until the start of spring 2008. I don't get it. Isn't there an inherent security risk by having part of the port system involved in the program while the other parts of the same port operations are not bound by similar procedures?
We talked earlier in the hearing on the issue of we've already run the terror watch list checks on all those ports, and we've also the existing security measures that are in place. So from the real world of security, the security measures are in place. Now we're locking it down with the biometric credential.
Thank you. I'll just add that in our work of looking at the development of similar systems, we've always concluded that testing up front, having a prototype phase is very important where all key elements are tested. And typically, we find it's reasonable that that's done at easier locations. So the problems, if you will, can be worked out before it's implemented on a wide-scale basis. And I would also add that if initial testing were to be done at a large, more complex port where difficulties could surface maybe more easily, it could be difficult to address those in that kind of environment. And as a result, it could result in the program being further delayed. So we think that more diligent work up front is important, so you can maybe avoid that down the line when you have bigger challenges with some of these larger ports.
Let me just say this, because we're running out of time, so perhaps Administrator Hawley could provide me in writing the risk factors used to identify the 10 priority ports. And I'd also like to say that you and I have had many discussions about a card such as this at the airports, and you feel it would impede commerce, et cetera. I wonder if you've done some analysis of the lost labor time and lost revenue as a result of the potential delays this system will cause. Right now, instead of being able to take a card and swipe it, they have to look at the card, and you know that's not accurate. This TWIC card is what's going to work. So I wonder if you can give me some information about all the delays and what it means to lost revenue, not necessarily at the airport, but for this program. And the time is up. Maybe you can let me know about it. Thank you very much.
And we will definitely pay you back for releasing your time early. We want to thank this panel of witnesses. The committee will recess for votes, and we will return 5 minutes after the last vote for the second panel. Thank you very much.